questions seemed to be so convoluted we didn't know how we were going to do it. And then, of course, we did what we always do in New York City. We said, and New York is different. The rest of the country isn't going to come out the same way we did. We were flabbergasted when we saw the results of the national consensus, because we all came to basically the same agreement on the issues. And that was a very interesting study. We spent about a year on it. And it was really a wonderful experience for those of us who worked on that study. So now we come to New York City, and I guess I started by saying we always think we're different than everybody else, and certainly we're not like everybody else in New York State. And then we are reminded that we are a creature of New York State, and there's very little that the city of New York can do without the approval of the state legislature. We were chartered by the state of New York, and the state of New York sets the boundaries in which we can make our laws. And the charter, the actual charter that the state gave us in 1898 when the city was unified into a city of 5 boroughs, is really the charter we're still operating with today, the New York City Charter. And we can change the charter as long as it complies with state law through city action. The New York City Council can change the charter. The state legislature can change our city charter. And we have something called initiative and referendum in New York City, where citizens can change our charter through collecting signatures to make charter changes. The League doesn't happen to believe in initiative and referendum. It's not a policy we support. We believe in the legislature making changes in laws, and don't necessarily support initiative and referendum, and just have to look at the state of California to decide that it may really be a bad idea. Is it, Kristen? We have our recent transplant from San Francisco. So everything that we do is really governed. We have a very close working relationship with the state, and that's because education law is state law. Health care, Medicaid, that's state law. Election law is certainly state law. And so we have to operate with the state, in tandem with the state, to come up with city program and what we're going to do in New York City. But there are lots of things we can do in New York City, and we've been very active in working on different issues that are city-related and have to do with city government. For example, we just were very active in making recommendations to the Charter Revision Commission that just completed its work and is submitting proposals to the voters. We've testified at every Charter Revision Commission for the past X number of years that I know of. We have positions, the election law, and that's really a very good example of how we work. And it'll take you through the national, state, and local level. The National League in 2002, when Congress decided that we had to change our voting systems and we needed new voting equipment, the first thing that everybody thought of was electronic voting. Everybody was going to push little buttons on screens. No one thought that there really was a problem with that. The first regulations that went out on new voting machines didn't have any security applications at all. And so states bought these electronic voting machines and suddenly had enormous problems with them. The National League of Women Voters did an analysis of the law that Congress had passed, the Help America Vote Act. And they said, okay, if you're going to buy voting machines, they have to be, and Mary Lou, correct me because I keep remembering, Sarah, that's what he said. Sarah. They have to be secure, they have to be accurate, they have to be recountable, and accessible. Those were the four criteria. And the State League took the 4 criteria and started investigating what systems were available, and quickly decided that the touchscreen systems were not secure. They may have been accessible, but they were not recountable, they were not reliable. Is that one of them? Reliable, not recountable. But they certainly were not secure. And when the state of New York started looking for voting machines, the League of Women Voters, without question, took the lead in New York State and said, touchscreen voting systems are not acceptable for New York State voters because they are not secure. And we were among the places that took the lead in saying, if you're going to do anything, you have to have a paper trail, the famous paper trail. And what we finally came up with in New York State was that we wanted optical scanners and ballot markers, that we decided that was the most secure voting system available. Someday, touchscreen may be wonderful, but not now. Now, New York State is the last state in the union to get new voting machines. We had that distinction. And part of it was we learned from other states' mistakes and the problems that existed in other states. And the League was really the leader. And I really do not think I'm inaccurate in saying that we might have been voting on touchscreen machines 5 years ago if the League and a group called New Yorkers for Verified Voting had not stood tall and said, that are not acceptable. We will not accept them. I assure you we would have had them in New York City because our election commissioners loved them and wanted them. But the League really stayed firm on that, and we work with the State League, and we have a New York City Board of Election, and we lobbied the New York City Board of Election, and the New York other branches lobbied the New York State Board of Election. And there may be kinks and problems and everything else, but we have what we think is the most secure system available in the country of optical scanners and ballot marking devices. Yeah, Phyllis, did you?
Well, yes, as you know, I love controversy, so I wanted to just bring something up because we were talking about it earlier. One of the really horrible things that happened was the National Board's position was not Sarah. They thought, National Board came out with a position that said, much to our horror, that we didn't have to have a paper trail. And at the next National Convention, there was such an uprising over that. They overturned the board, and in fact, I think they threw out, maybe, the president of the National Board after that. Something happened there, but at any rate, here was an overturning. It was a perfect example of a grassroots uprising and a change in policy.
Yeah, there was a feeling among, as I go back and you look at 2002, the fact of the matter is people were not aware of the problems that the touchscreens have. And states bought them all over the country, all with good intentions. The Election Assistance Commission, which was created under the Help America Vote Act, never even put security requirements in their guidelines until 2007. And so this was not an issue. And what they thought was happening is there is an internal paper trail in an electronic voting machine. It's inside the machine. And that was what the League thought would give you a recountable result. It was inside the machine. And it wasn't until people from local leagues said that's not acceptable. The voter has to see the paper to see how their vote is being cast, that the argument turned. And at that point, the National League said that states could pick any system they wanted. Leagues could support any system as long as it was secure, accurate, reliable, I'm not sure, recountable, and accessible. So that didn't say paper trail. It simply said, under these criteria, local leagues could select machine. Now, we had fun. We had our local members calling all over the country to see what types of systems other states, since they all had them and we didn't, had. And we found a lot of leagues who were in favor of touchscreen systems. And it wasn't until some years later when they started trading them in that we ended up on the majority side. But that was a real close working relationship at the city, state, and national level. And we became pains at the Board of Elections in New York City, asking them to assure certain regulations and certain procedures will be followed. So we look at a national position, we see how the city and state fit into the national position. And I want to give you one other example because it was fairly controversial, and we did hand it out. And that was the position on the Islamic Center. And we handed out copies of the position. And we looked, it's a current issue. It was one that people called us about, that were interested in. And we were approached by some other organizations saying, would we participate in making a statement on relating to the Islamic Center? So the first thing we did was we looked at our national position to see if we had a position that in fact would cover taking a position on the center. And we looked at what the position that seemed most logical was individual liberties oppose major threats to basic constitutional rights. We thought that was a position that very clearly covered the situation of the Islamic Center. We contacted the state league and said, we would like to take this position. It's in New York City. We would like it to be a city position. They then spoke to national, I believe, and came back and said, just keep them informed. It fits in under the position. The league joined with, and I did this even though it wasted paper, but it's saying we never waste paper. It seemed important to me to do it. The position is very simple, and it really doesn't mention the Islamic Center particularly, or that it's a position that basically said we believe in freedom of religion, and we welcome the efforts to build institutions that serve their community in our diverse cities. It's a very simple position. We felt comfortable signing on to this position, and the reason I did it this way was to show you the lists and lists of other organizations in the city that also signed on to that same position. That's really how we work. If National had said, no, we don't have a position that fits this, we would not have been able to do it. But we felt, we asked, we consulted, and we came up with what we thought was a reasonable position for the city of New York to take. So that's basically how we work. We have the same committees when we do the education study. We will have a committee in New York City. Each branch of the league in the state of New York will have a committee. Do we then submit the consensus as a state, or is each branch? It goes up to the state, and the state.
No, every local league is
to national.
Yeah, the state league is a level above us, but it's not between us.
Okay. Yeah. So that's basically how we work. We develop close relationships, particularly with particularly as it relates to election law. If the League of Women Voters isn't looking at election law, nobody's looking at election law. And we work very closely with the State League on election law. The absentee ballot that Tony referenced before was something we've worked on for years, trying to get the absentee ballot, which we thought was really an invasion of privacy. They didn't have to know who your doctor was if you needed an absentee ballot, and they didn't know what day you were going to come back from California if you needed an absentee ballot. So we worked on that for years. I heard somebody before, when Tony spoke about how many years we've been working on redistricting, sort of sigh. We become experts. That's what we become. We work on this stuff so long we become experts, and then suddenly it passes. And this year was really an example of that. I know they talk about the dysfunctional legislature, and we're not going to question that, but in terms of the programs that the League has supported over the years, this was a fairly successful time for us. We got the absentee ballot change. We now have, if you fill out an affidavit ballot in a poll site, and they take it back to the Board of Elections and find you're not registered or enrolled as you thought you were, they used to send you, even as of the primary, they sent you a new registration form, and you had to start the process all over again. We got a law passed that said, now the affidavit ballot will serve as your registration form. The envelope will serve as a registration form. We think that's a major advantage. We've been working for 15 years on the repeal of the Rockefeller drug laws. That came through in the past 2 years. So we think we surprise ourselves when something passes. When we saw the new voting machines really come in, Mary Lou and Kate and I and other people have worked on this since 2002. I really couldn't believe it. I mean, I said, what are we going to do next year?